Good afternoon, everyone. This is Candace Key with the Federal Transit Administration. Today, my colleagues and I will provide you with a brief presentation on both the proposed National Public Transportation Safety Plan and the proposed Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for Public Transportation Agency Safety Plans. We'll also guide you all to the dockets for both of those documents so that you may submit your comments for formal consideration. And we'll be taking questions at the conclusion of our presentation. To begin, just some housekeeping matters. This webinar is a forum for FTA to explain what is covered in both of the proposed documents. Today's webinar is not a public hearing characteristic of the formal rulemaking process. Instead, today's webinar provides an opportunity for FTA to discuss both documents and an opportunity for you all to ask questions regarding the contents of each. For your comments to be formally considered during this process, please submit them to the docket. It is extremely important for members of the transit industry, including small providers, to participate in the rulemaking and policy development process. Your comments will impact the development of both a final rule and a final plan. In addition, your comments help to create a strong record to support the rational basis needed for issuing final documents. This means that submissions to the docket that are most influential are those that contain data, cite source materials, and provide rationale to support the comments. So now I'll just provide you with a brief overview of the several components of the Public Transportation Safety Program and a little bit of background. The administration first transmitted transit safety legislation to Congress in December of 2009, and many of the provisions sought in the administration's bill were included in the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act when it was signed into law in July of 2012. With MAP 21, FTA, this is the first time that FTA, since the inception of the Federal Transit Program in 1964, has had this great of a regulatory role with respect to transit safety. MAP 21 gave FTA long-sought authority to establish safety performance criteria for all modes of public transportation and to establish minimum safety performance standards for public transportation. In addition, MAP 21 significantly strengthened FTA's ability to address outstanding recommendations from investigations into fatal transit accidents, correct known deficiencies in the staffing and qualifications of state safety oversight agencies, and apply lessons learned to strengthen our industry safety posture. With MAP 21, FTA finally has a strong foundation upon which to build a common sense approach that is both scalable and flexible. In May of 2013, FTA issued a Dear Colleague letter to the industry informing it of FTA's intent to adopt the methods and principles of safety management systems as a foundation for the development and implementation of the new Public Transportation Safety Program. The Public Transportation Safety Program has several regulatory components. The first on the top of your screen is the Public Transportation Safety Program Rule. On August 14th, 2015, FTA issued an Nprm to set substantive and procedural rules for FTA's administration of the Public Transportation Safety Program. The Safety Program Rulemaking would formally adopt SMS as the foundation for FTA's approach to safety oversight, set the procedures whereby FTA would conduct inspections, investigations, audits, examinations, and testing of facilities, equipment, rolling stock, and the operations of public transportation systems, and set the procedures where FTA would take enforcement actions against a public transportation system, state safety oversight agency, including the issuance of directives or advisories and directing the use of federal financial assistance, and also withholding federal financial assistance. FTA expects to issue a final safety program rule later this year. On February 27, 2015, FTA issued a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking to transform and strengthen the state safety oversight of rail fixed guideway public transportation systems. So this is the rule in the bottom right corner of this slide. Consistent with the statute, this rulemaking would require financial and legal independence for state safety oversight agencies, strong enforcement authorities for state safety oversight agencies, and adequate human and financial resources to oversee the number and complexity of rail fixed guideway systems under the jurisdiction of the SSOA. These new rules would replace current rules at 49 CFR Part 659, which have been in place for the past 20 years. FTA expects to issue a final rule for the State Safety Oversight Program shortly. Also on February 27th of 2015, FTA issued interim provisions for the Public Transportation Safety Certification Training Program. The interim provisions took effect on May 28th of 2015. The interim provisions set mandatory curriculum and training requirements for federal and state safety oversight agency personnel who are directly responsible for safety oversight of public transportation systems, and the state safety oversight agency personnel who conduct safety audits and examinations of rail transit systems. On December 3rd, 2015, FTA issued a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking which proposed to adopt the interim provisions as the initial regulatory training requirements for industry personnel responsible for safety oversight. FTA expects to issue a final rule for the training certification program later this year. And the discussion, or the topic of today's conversation are the documents that we issued on February 5th, 2016, the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, Nprm, which my colleagues Mike and Brian will discuss, and the proposed National Public Transportation Safety Plan. MAP 21 created a performance-based and multimodal program to strengthen the United States surface transportation system. By focusing on national goals, increasing accountability, and improving transparency, these changes will improve decision-making through better informed planning and programming. The United States Department of Transportation is implementing the new performance requirements through a number of rulemakings that will be released in several phases. FTA is tasked with developing the following performance-based components: the National Public Transportation Safety Plan, which must include performance criteria, minimum safety performance criteria for all modes of public transportation; a rulemaking for public transportation safety plans, which would require recipients to set performance targets based on the criteria established in the national plan; and a rulemaking for transit asset management, which would establish performance measures from FTA and a requirement that recipients set performance targets based on those measures. In addition, FTA and the Federal Highway Administration are jointly working on a rule for statewide and metropolitan planning, which would incorporate transit asset management and safety performance plans and targets into the statewide and metropolitan planning processes. So as I mentioned, both of the documents that we're discussing today were published in the Federal Register on February 5th. Prior to their publication in October of 2013, FTA issued an advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking on both safety and transit asset management. FTA used or reviewed the comments posted to that ANPRM and considered them in the development of the two documents we'll discuss today. The comment period for the documents we're discussing today will close on April 5th, after which FTA will review the comments, draft responses, and draft both a final rule and plan. I will note that FTA will not be formally extending the comment period, so I encourage you all to submit your comments to the docket by April 5th. And now I'll begin my discussion of the proposed National Public Transportation Safety Plan. The National Safety Plan includes 4 chapters and 3 appendices, which provide some guidance and tools to the industry in its implementation of safety management systems. Through MAP 21 and the FAST Act, Congress has required FTA to create and implement a National Public Transportation Safety Plan to improve the safety of all public transportation systems that receive funding under 49 U.S.C. Chapter 53. A national safety plan must include safety performance criteria for all modes of public transportation. In our first proposed plan, we have included 4 proposed criteria, which I'll discuss. The definition of the term state of good repair, which would be developed under a rulemaking for transit asset management. Minimum safety performance standards for public transportation vehicles. Minimum safety performance standards for transit operations, and a safety certification training program. So why does FTA need a national safety plan, or why does the industry need a national safety plan? Our national well-being is dependent upon the provision of safe, efficient, and reliable public transportation. Injury rates for transit modes have been trending upwards since 2002, and transit operators will need to balance competing priorities to expand service, operate existing service, and replace and maintain existing capital assets, all while ensuring that operations are safe for their employees and the riding public, and all within a fiscally constrained environment. The National Public Transportation Safety Plan will contribute to improved safety performance by being responsive to the statutory requirements for a national plan and communicating FTA's approach to improving the industry safety performance. The national plan is intended to guide the collective effort towards managing safety risks within our nation's public transportation system. It is based on a proactive approach to safety risk management that is outcome-focused and emphasizes improved safety performance. I will note that the National Safety Plan is not a regulation. However, transit providers would be required to set safety performance targets based on the criteria in the national plan. FTA may publish future iterations of the national plan in the Federal Register for public notice and comment. Chapter 2 of the National Safety Plan, proposed National Safety Plan, is the SMS framework. This document was actually posted on FTA's website sometime last fall, and we've incorporated it into the National Safety Plan. So one of the purposes of the National Safety Plan is that it will be a repository for guidance, technical assistance, and other tools. So we have incorporated the SMS framework, which is a foundational implementation guide, into this first proposed plan. And the SMS framework is an excellent document for transit agencies, both large and small, to look at in order to see what things they need to start doing in order to begin to implement SMS within their public transportation system. As I mentioned, the proposed National Safety Plan must include minimum safety performance criteria for all modes of public transportation, and this requirement ties the plan into the broader MAP 21 performance management framework. Safety performance management is a tool which allows transit providers and FTA to identify safety concerns and monitor progress in safety improvement. FTA safety performance criteria are categories of measures that focus on the reduction of safety events and fatalities and injuries of people accessing and riding public transportation, the employees who operate and maintain the system, and pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers of other vehicles affected by the safe operation of public transportation vehicles. Selection of each measure was based on data that FTA already collects through the National Transit Database. So now onto the 4 proposed criteria. The first is fatalities, which is measured as the total number of reportable fatalities and rate per total unlinked passenger trips by mode. The second is injuries, which is measured as the total number of reportable injuries and rate per total unlinked passenger trips by mode. The third is safety events, measured as the total number of reportable events and rate per total vehicle miles by mode. And the fourth is system reliability, which is measured as the mean distance between failure by mode. With respect to system reliability, FTA has consistently stated that there is a nexus between state of good repair and safety. Moreover, the law explicitly links the two. As I mentioned, the National Safety Plan must include the definition of the term state of good repair, which will be developed under a transit asset management rule. And transit agencies would be required to set performance targets based on this state of good repair criteria in their public transportation agency safety plan. The proposed reliability measure is intended to serve as a proxy for the relationship, or excuse me, the impact that asset condition has on safety performance. And now I am going to conduct our first poll. Have you had the opportunity to read FTA's SMS framework document?
This is Liz. We'll leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. We have 81% have voted, so just a few more seconds and then we'll close the poll and show the results. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So 27% yes, 73% no. Okay, I'm going to hide the poll and then we can move on.
Okay, moving along. Chapter 4 of the proposed National Safety Plan is managing safety risks and assuring safety performance. As I mentioned, FTA intends for the National Safety Plan to be a repository of standards, guidance, technical assistance, and other tools to aid the industry in improving upon its already excellent safety performance. To that end, in this first proposed plan, FTA has included a number of voluntary, and I'll reiterate that, voluntary minimum safety performance standards for vehicles and for transit operations. FTA strongly encourages all agencies to which these standards would apply to consider adopting the minimum voluntary standards. Going forward, FTA will incorporate additional technical assistance, guidance documents, and templates into future iterations of the National Safety Plan. And now I will turn it over to my colleagues Mike and Brian to discuss the Agency Safety Plan Notice of Proposed Rulemaking.
Great, thanks Candace. My name is Michael Culotta. I'm FTA's Regional Counsel in New York City, and I co-wrote the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Notice of Proposed Rulemaking with Brian Alberts in our Safety Office. Today we're going to walk you through the rulemaking, and as we work through the slides, we're going to tag team and go back and forth. So our first slide is the table of contents for the proposed rule, but I'd like to jump ahead to the next slide and talk about the legal authority that we have for the rulemaking. Through MAP 21 and the FAST Act, Congress has required each operator of a public transportation system that receives FTA funds to develop and implement a public transportation agency safety plan.
Hi everybody, this is Brian Alberts. I am the policy lead and program analyst in our Office of System Safety, and I also co-wrote the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, Nprm, with Mike Culotta. So on this next slide, we talk about the Nprm. So FTA proposes to implement 49 USC 5329D by adding a new Part 673 to Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations. In the Nprm, FTA summarizes and responds to public comments that it received on its October 3rd, 2013 Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or AMPRM. And just as a side note, we'll be going through the presentation as per sections of the Nprm.
The rule would apply to each operator of a public transportation system that receives federal financial assistance under 49 USC Chapter 53, and that would include recipients and subrecipients. The rule would not apply to a transportation operator that only provides service that's closed to the general public and only available for a particular clientele. So just for example, to illustrate, the rule would not apply to a transportation operator that is a subrecipient under FTA's Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program at Section 5310, that's a nonprofit or community service organization that provides closed-door service, such as a church. The rule also would not apply to commuter rail service regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration, and the rule would not apply to passenger ferry service regulated by the United States Coast Guard.
So moving on, in terms of the role of the state, each state is required to draft and certify a public transportation agency safety plan on behalf of any recipient or subrecipient under 49 USC 5310 and 5311 and any small public transportation provider located in that state. We are proposing that a small public transportation provider would include a recipient or subrecipient of funds under FTA's Urbanized Area Formula Program at 49 USC 5307 that has 100 or fewer vehicles in revenue service and that does not operate a rail fixed skyway system. And FTA is proposing this definition of small public transportation provider based off of comments from the Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and also to be consistent with the Transit Asset Management, or TAM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Also, any of these small transit agencies may opt to draft and certify their own plans. If a state drafts and certifies a plan on behalf of a transit agency, then that transit agency is required to carry out and implement the plan. So small operators, including 5310, 5311, and small 5307 operators, are still required to carry out and implement the plan, even if the state drafts and certifies it on their behalf. And this includes the Safety Management Systems, or SMS section of the rule text, which is subpart C. Finally, a State Safety Oversight Agency, or SSOA, will be required to review and approve each plan of a rail fixed skyway system under its jurisdiction. And as you can see here from this graphic, this kind of lays it out better for you to be able to see it visually. So a state would draft and certify a safety plan for Section 5310 recipients and subrecipients, Section 5311 recipients and subrecipients, and small Section 5307 recipients and subrecipients.
FTA recognizes the potential administrative and financial burdens that the proposed rule could have on the industry. So to assist states and transit agencies with the drafting and development of their safety plans, FTA intends to provide templates, checklists, guidance, and other forms of technical assistance to the industry.
In terms of certification and enforcement, each transit agency or state will be required to annually certify that it has a plan compliant with the rule. FTA proposes in the Nprm to use its existing certification and assurances process to satisfy this requirement. And we are proposing this since it's a process that's already in place and familiar to many of our grantees, or most of our grantees. Also, FTA would ensure compliance with the rule through its existing triennial review and state management review process, and is proposing to eventually add questions to these reviews on agency safety plans and safety management systems, or SMS.
Each transit agency or state would have 1 year after the effective date of the final rule to draft and certify that they have a safety plan compliant with this part. And any rail transit agency with an existing system safety program plan under 49 CFR Part 659 may keep that plan in effect until 1 year after the effective date of a final rule. And I believe it's time for our second poll. And our question is, do you currently have a formal safety plan in place? Please take a moment to vote.
I'm just used to it.
Okay, we'll wait a little bit longer. There's 72% have voted. So if you can vote in the poll, and then we'll show the results. Okay, we got 77%, so I'm going to close that and share the results. So pretty close. Many do, but also many do not have a formal safety plan in place. Okay, I'm going to hide the results and we'll move on.
Okay, so in terms of coordination with the planning process, each transit agency is proposed to be required to make its safety performance targets available to states and metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, to assist with the selection of safety performance targets at both the state and MPO levels.
So I want to take a few minutes and talk you through the general requirements for each safety plan. And these are each of the proposed elements that each safety plan would need to have to be compliant with the rule. First, the safety plan would be signed by the agency's accountable executive and approved by either the agency's board of directors or an equivalent authority. Now, the accountable executive would be the individual who has the ultimate responsibility and accountability for the implementation and maintenance of the safety management system of the transit agency, the responsibility for carrying out the agency's asset management plan, and control or direction over the human and capital resources necessary to develop and maintain the agency's safety plan and asset management plan. So that would be the accountable executive. Many agencies do not have a board of directors, so an equivalent authority may approve their safety plan. And an equivalent authority would be an entity that carries out duties similar to that of a board of directors and has sufficient authority to review and approve a public transportation agency safety plan. For a city operator, that equivalent authority could be a mayor. For a county operator, the equivalent authority could be a county executive. And for many of the smaller transit systems across the country, the equivalent authority could be the grant manager. The second key requirement for each safety plan would be documented processes and activities related to the agency's safety management system. And Brian and I will walk you through each of those requirements in a few moments. Third, the safety plan should identify safety performance targets based on the safety performance criteria in FTA's National Safety Plan. Fourth, the safety plan should be compliant with FTA's Public Transportation Safety Program and FTA's National Public Transportation Safety Plan. Fifth, the safety plan should include a process and timeline for an annual review and update. And there's one special requirement for rail transit agencies only. Each rail transit system should have an emergency preparedness and response plan. And this is an existing requirement for all rail transit agencies under FTA's existing state safety oversight rule under Part 659. So this is a carryover requirement from that rule.
In terms of SMS, or Safety Management Systems, I'm going to provide a brief introduction of it. So in 2013, a Dear Colleague letter was sent out by a former FTA administrator on the agency's intention to move forward with Safety Management Systems, or SMS, for safety. Each transit agency would need to include in its Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan a Safety Management System. That Safety Management System would consist of the four following elements or pillars of SMS. And those are Safety Management Policy, Safety Risk Management, Safety Assurance, and Safety Promotion. And in the following slides, we'll go into these more in depth. Each of these components should work together to provide a proactive, comprehensive approach to mitigating and eliminating safety events. The system is flexible and should be scaled to fit the unique needs of each transit agency's operating environment, which includes large and small systems, as well as urban and rural, and includes bus and rail systems. This system integrates safety into all aspects of a transit agency's activities, from planning to design to construction to operations and to maintenance. And now we're going to be moving on to our third poll. The question for this poll is, have you started incorporating SMS principles within your organization? So please vote now.
Okay, we'll leave it open a little bit longer. We have 75% voted. Okay, we got most people, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, moving on.
So we're going to take a few moments and walk you through each pillar of SMS, starting with the first pillar, Safety Management Policy. Through Safety Management Policy, the transit agency would establish a written statement of safety policy and communicate that throughout the agency. It would include the agency's safety objectives and safety performance targets, and it also would include a confidential employee reporting program that would allow staff to report unsafe conditions up to senior management without fear of reprisal, which is a very important piece of safety management policy. The policy, through safety management policy, the transit agency also would identify the organizational accountabilities and safety responsibilities for the agency's accountable executive, chief safety officer, senior agency leadership, and key staff responsible for safety.
The next pillar or component of SMS is Safety Risk Management. So under this, each agency must establish a process for identifying safety hazards, a process for evaluating the safety risks associated with safety hazards, a process for prioritizing safety risks, and finally, a process for implementing safety risk mitigations.
The third pillar of SMS is safety assurance, and it really involves the continual monitoring of an agency's system to identify potential safety hazards. So through this pillar of SMS, the transit agency would establish a process for monitoring compliance with and sufficiency of its internal operations and maintenance procedures. There would be a process for monitoring its operations to identify hazards not identified through the safety risk management process that Brian just talked you through. There would be a process for identifying risk mitigation that was ineffective, inappropriate, or not implemented as intended. There would be a process for investigating safety events, for monitoring safety-related information, for identifying and assessing changes that may introduce new hazards or impact safety performance, and there would be a process for assessing safety performance and correcting any safety deficiencies.
And finally, the final element or component of SMS is safety promotion. So as part of safety promotion, FTA is proposing that each agency must establish a comprehensive safety training program, including refresher training, for all agency employees and contractors directly responsible for the management of safety. And just to clarify a bit, this is different than the safety certification training program, as that rulemaking applies to those responsible for the oversight of safety. This training is really just the training at each individual agency and is for those at agencies directly responsible for the management of safety. So many agencies already have a safety training program in place that would satisfy this requirement. Further, FTA is proposing that each agency must communicate safety performance throughout the organization, and this includes communication on safety from leadership all the way down to frontline staff. And now we're going to move on to our fourth poll, which asks, does your organization currently require refresher training? So please vote now.
Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, share. Oops, there we go. There's the results. Okay, back to you, Brian.
All right, so I'd like to spend a few moments discussing safety's relationship with asset management and state of good repair. Candace discussed this a little bit during her presentation. I want to elaborate a little more on the connection. So Congress recognized the nexus between safety and state of good repair. An asset that is not in a state of good repair may or may not pose an unacceptable safety risk. FTA is proposing to bridge safety and asset management through its rules on safety and asset management. Under FTA's proposed rule for asset management, each agency would be required to conduct condition assessments on their assets. And under FTA's proposed agency safety plan rule, a transit agency would consider the results of those condition assessments while performing safety risk management and safety assurance activities. The results of the condition assessments and the subsequent SMS analysis would inform a transit agency's determination as to whether an asset meets FTA's state of good repair standards, specifically the standard whereby the use of the asset in its current condition would not pose a known unacceptable safety risk. Ultimately, under both rules, the accountable executive would have the responsibility for decision making.
The final section of the NPRM talks about record keeping. So FTA is proposing that agencies be required to keep records related to the implementation of its agency safety plan, including SMS, for 3 years. And this is to be consistent with both the triennial and state management review process. Also, this 3 years is a minimum, and agencies can keep records and are encouraged to do so for longer if they would like to do that.
We welcome you all to submit comments on our proposals. The public comment period, as Candace mentioned, closes on April 5th, 2016. And if you're submitting comments, those comments should identify the appropriate docket number and regulatory identification number that corresponds to either the National Safety Plan or the Agency Safety Plan, NPRM. And that information is on this slide that's in front of you right now.
There are a number of ways to provide your feedback. We encourage you to provide it directly to the docket electronically at www.regulations.gov, and the link is there. Also, we will accept comments using the other listed methods as well, which include U.S. mail, and our address here at USDOT is listed, hand delivery, or fax, and the fax number is seen there on the screen. So now we're going to move on to our fifth and final poll of the webinar. And that question is, do you plan to submit a formal comment to the public docket? And please vote now.
Okay, we'll leave it open just a little bit longer if you want to vote. Okay, we got 74%. We're going to close and share the results, and then we will move on with the rest of the webinar.
So we've done a number of these webinars, and we've had a bunch of public outreach. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm happy that we have one more left. Next week on March 16th, we are hosting a public listening session at APTA's Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C. And if you're interested in learning more about our proposals, you can visit FTA's website, our safety website, at the link here on this slide that's up on the screen. And here's a snapshot of our safety website that has all the related, the Federal Register notices and related documents on the proposed National Safety Plan and the Agency Safety Plan, NPRM.
And here you can see the contact information for myself, Brian Alberts, as well as Candace and Michael Culotta. And we'd be happy to take your questions at this time.